Thank you for coming. It's a real pleasure to see you all here. And it's a real pleasure to have the Burack lectures back on campus. This was an event that was happening prior to when I got here, and then COVID shut it all down. And so I want to say thank you first to the UVM Foundation, who manages that gift and allows us to do these kind of things. And of course, I want to thank Dan Burack, who is not here at the moment, but who we know well as a friend of the university. He's done a tremendous amount to support UVM in a number of different endeavors, and including this lecture series, but also in many other ways, been a tremendous friend to UVM. It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Danforth. Chris and I started working together when I got here, when Adrian, what was Adrian's last name, who quit? Del Maestro, who quit soon after I arrived, probably no relationship, and left the VACC. And I went to Chris and I said, I think you're up. And he said, I don't think I'm up. And I said, no, I think you're up, and it's your turn. And he said, all right, I'm going to do it for a year, because I was new, and he didn't know. And he said, I'll do it for a year. And I said, you'll do it for a long time, because you're going to love this job, and you're going to love working with our office. And he's still in the job, so I'm at least partly right. Chris has been a tremendous leader for computational work on campus broadly. Our users at the VACC are about 3 times what they were when he took over. And the user base has expanded out as well as in depth in terms of sheer numbers. It's also drawing from fields far, far and wide across the campus. The latest initiative that he and others have introduced there is a set of facilitators who are going to work to try and bring a number of different users from outside the classic high-performance computing space into the HPC environment. And that's folks in humanities, it's folks in the social sciences, it's folks in education, and broadly across our campus. This is an opportunity to have a machine or set of machines like this on campus that's really unprecedented in our region. There isn't anything like it in Vermont, and there are places with bigger clusters, but there aren't places that have easier access and more straightforward opportunities for expertise than we have here. And so that's, I think, a really special thing about the VACC under Chris's leadership, something that really changed. Chris, I have known for in other roles as well. He and Peter and others and Juniper and folks stepped up to lead our new EPSCoR project. And the EPSCoR project here historically had been an environmental program that had run for many years. We had kind of gotten the message that we had run our course in that way. And we set out to try and create a new research infrastructure around computational modeling, some of which you're going to hear about today, that went far into other areas, and in particular into the areas of the humanities and social sciences and a range of fields. And that EPSCoR project is based around the sort of machine learning and development of new tools around large corpuses of texts. And this is a kind of an unprecedented thing. When we talked to the NSF program officers about this, they said, we had to learn a lot as an institution to be able to even understand and review this grant. They had to go out and figure out, how do we review a grant that is a program building grant that's so clearly rooted in the STEM field, whose direction is entirely devoted to corpuses of text and things like the humanities, right? That was not something NSF felt like they were really ready to review. So we pushed the EPSCoR program in a new direction, and they subsequently ended the program. Maybe, I don't know if that maybe had something to do with it. And they're no longer going to do the track ones, but I think that was a different scenario. But this was a large institutional grant led by Chris and Peter and others, Jeremiah I saw earlier, Juniper, a great team of researchers that is really putting high-performance computing into new spaces at our university. So all of this, you can hear, is a pattern of taking a very kind of classic resource, building its user base, advancing its application into areas that really hadn't been done before. That kind of groundbreaking spirit. So in that way, it's really a pleasure to have Chris as a colleague, as a partner, and as a faculty member. His undergraduate degree is from Bates in mathematics. His PhD is in applied mathematics and scientific computation. I think if I have it right, from the University of Maryland. I won't say what year, but he's younger than I am, so he's got that going for him. He has been at UVM for his career, and that's really one of our great achievements, is that we've been able to keep folks like Chris Danforth here at UVM, and hopefully we're able to continue to do that for a long time. Title of his paper today, as you can see, Measuring Happiness, Health, and Stories of Society. And with that, I'll turn it over to Professor Chris Danforth. Please start.
That was great. Thank you, Kirk. And it's a real pleasure to see so many friendly faces here. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. I want to thank the folks who invited me to give this lecture. Appreciate that too. And I'll start by saying that I have, from the beginning of my life, just been fascinated with what we can predict and how we go about doing that. When I was a kid, I had a tornado land in my backyard in New Jersey, and ever since then, I've just been really amazed at what we're able to do, and I wanted to develop methods to make predictions that are useful to society. And I started in weather prediction. That's what my PhD was in, and it's really one of the great success stories of science, what we can do there. We don't really think of it that way, but it's society's great algorithmic decision support system. And so I have, like a couple videos I want to show you to get the ball rolling here. So the first one, this is one of these tabletop physics experiments that I'm in love with that I'm gonna hand around. But basically, what it shows is what happens when you drop several thousand steel beads down this series of barriers, right? And it would be quite difficult, but potentially possible to predict the path that any one of them is going to take. You'd have to measure its mass. You'd have to measure aspects of the path that it could take. You'd have a physical model for how gravity interacts and what these collisions look like, how much energy is lost. It makes noise. I'm going to hand this out right now. So in principle, you could try and figure out which path any individual one of these is going to make. But it's really, really hard. And it turns out we today couldn't actually, with the best computers in the world, like the one Kirk was talking about, tell you, if we dropped one bead at a time, which bin it would end up in at the end. But we can tell you a lot about the statistical properties of the collective. And that's a really remarkable thing about science and why we know that it works for some types of questions. So you can see there, some clever person has put together one of these things where the outcome in a statistical sense is really well understood. I'm just going to hand this around because the only way I can talk about metaphors is with simple physics experiments. That's how my brain works. So the goal for some of the work that I'm going to talk to you about that we've been doing is how to take the data we produce through our phones and through the things we share online, the tweets and the TikToks and the Instagram reels, and turn it into information that can help society understand public health issues and at the individual level make people's lives better somehow. So that we'll come back to the idea there. So this is the big picture of our story. We're going to take the data we share online. I'm going to build instruments, much like a thermometer or a microscope that we understand really well how they work, and try and build things like that for society based on our language. So I'm going to tell you about a few of the fun things that we've done in that direction, and then some of the more serious ones, and then there'll be time at the end to ask questions if you have any. So that's the plan. All right, so our first project that I'm going to tell you about is called Story Wrangler, and I'm going to motivate it with a famous tweet from about a decade ago now that says, 2 explosions in the White House, Obama is injured. And this tweet was posted by the Associated Press Twitter account, and within a few minutes, $100 billion was evacuated from the stock market in response to that message, because we've hooked together now all kinds of different systems that previously were not connected to each other. And fortunately, the stock market rebounded when the AP a few minutes later said, hey, we were hacked by the Syrian Electronic Army. Just kidding. But this was one of the first times that we saw how the systems we've set up to allow different types of communications to integrate with each other, high-frequency trading algorithms that know, oh, when I see the president's name and an explosion, I should start selling stocks. When that message arrived on our computer, we've collected over 200 billion of these messages over the last 15 years. We have, this is what it looked like when it arrived. There's a lot of metadata associated with it, how many people follow the AP Twitter account and how many times it has been shared around the world. There's GPS information if it was included. And we have, rolling in every day, there's, 500 million of these messages posted. They'd wrap around the Earth's equator once if you wrote them on Post-it notes. And so it's what's amazing about it really is it's the first time we've been able to understand what regular people are thinking. And if you think about in human history, what we've known about what's going on is generally mediated through money, people who have resources. And so now we're trying to build instruments that can let us understand what are people talking about, what are people seeing. So here's an example. We built a tool called Story Wrangler where you can go and see how often people mention certain words. So the first thing we do, of course, is we look up the word God. And how often do people talk about God? So God's calling. Thank you, Ginger. Appreciate that. And so about, every day, roughly, God is about the 300th most popular word on Twitter. The y-axis here is logarithmically spaced, so like powers of 10. The and of, those are up at the top. And then words you never hear are down around 1 million. So God is kind of a reference point for us. And we call, Peter came up with this ultra-fame concept for things that appear more often than that. The word Trump appeared more often than the word God every day during his term in office, for example. So it's one way of thinking about how popular are individuals. Twitter is a big place for music, so BTS was the most popular band and it often actually superseded Trump. So it was in the top 3 words some days with and of. The BTS K-pop Twitter handle was pretty remarkable. So we built a site where you can go and learn about how people talk about certain things. Again, it's collective attention. So this includes news sources and what scientists are sharing, what Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift are talking about. Those get reshared, and this is a site you can also turn on and off that amplification from retweets. So this is the Story Wrangler site. There was a day, I'll just toggle over to it for a second. There was a day back in, I think it was 2015, where the smiley emoji made it to be the most frequently used word on Twitter. And this is a place you can go and download information if you're interested in trying to understand it. But this platform where we can see what people are talking about, it's really unique in the history of society to be able to do this sort of thing. Google did something like this a decade ago with respect to books and how often words are used in books, but this sort of thing had never existed for social media. We, of course, started with fun things like counting how often people laugh. So over 1 billion times, people typed H-A, H-A, H-A in some combination of those, and we calculated all of them. We counted all of them and all the other words that people stretch. So you can see here on the bottom right, there's this sort of ironic laugh, H-A, and then there's the ha, and there's an odd and even thing where, like, if it's got odd number of characters, there's slightly less of those. People like to have an even, we have this sort of OCD thing to finish it well. There's a lot of misspellings and things like this, and you think this is, this is sort of a funny way of thinking about why you would go about doing this. Well, we're trying to talk to computers and share whether we're upset or whether we're happy, and computers are trying to understand that this is how we do that, because we have examples now of people on the internet doing all kinds of things. This is in Spanish, and in English we have, how often people are using the letter H and A, and so there's another way of visualizing it, like a little river network. So the most common thing is to alternate H and A, and that goes all the way down here. But then if you're not so good at typing, you can get a misspelling, and that's, so this is like H, A, H, and this word right here, this happened 20,000 times. The third and fourth letters were H. And it's easy to count this sort of stuff on computers. We're not actually doing this all on our own. But this is how we're going to train things like GPT to understand when people are upset, let's say, when they're shouting on the internet. And for example, this is what the willow tree of screaming looks like, all of the A's and G's and H's as you work your way down. So we have a whole ecosystem of these word trees that are a way of reflecting how people express themselves when they smash the keys and are telling us they don't feel very well on Twitter, for example. So that's kind of a silly one. We have a project where we count how often people use words about food and words about exercise and the balance of those two things. So it turns out we talk a lot more about food than we do about activities. But if you go ahead and look at the balance between those two based on where they come from on the earth, it correlates really strongly with things we care about in public health, like heart disease rates, and obesity rates. So Vermont does really well in this caloric balance. It's the third best state, according to Twitter at least. So those are some of the examples that I'll start to motivate what we're doing. Some of them are going to be pointed at public health, and some of them at social movements. But the concept is, we have all of these communications from people's mobile devices, and we're trying to discover information that's going to be helpful to you. Some of it will be at the individual level or at the population level. That's the idea. So one of our first projects was really fun about a decade ago was to try and decide what the happiest city in the U.S. is, according to Twitter. And so we did this big study looking at all the cities, and I'll this is one of those fun times where the media picked up on it. I'm going to play you a video that announced back then what that result of that study was. Here we go. Okay, so it won't surprise you to know that in Napa, people responded to this announcement with all kinds of really happy tweets, thereby changing the output that we got from their measurement. And that's something that really is a hallmark of the sorts of instruments we build, is that people respond to what they're measuring. This work that we did in weather prediction, hurricanes don't change where they're going to go and modify the cone of uncertainty and the laws of physics because you've made a good forecast, right? That stuff doesn't change. And so this is one of the challenges of dealing with people and trying to understand how we're feeling. There was, of course, other responses to this that were really funny to get sent up on local TV is fantastic. I'm just going to play one more of those.
That's according to a new research done by the University of Vermont, who sifted through a bunch of Twitter accounts and Twitter itself to get all this research. And when we say they did research, they have charts, they have graphs.
Pages.
It was very technical as far as how deep they went and to see how happy people were across the country.
Definitely technical for Twitter, for that matter.
Okay, so there was also another reaction from the local news. This is from the Beaumont, Texas paper where Beaumont was, I'll just read the headline. Eggheads find Beaumont is the saddest city. That's what some eggheads at UVM determined. And so there's, obviously there's a big reaction to this. We had people coming onto our blog and they say, oh, well, actually, I completely agree. I've lived all over lots of places. Beaumont is pure hellhole, humid, trashy, terrible schools, corrupt government, terrible culture other than crawfish boils. Anyway, so there's a backlash to that. People in Beaumont are saying we're not so bad, I swear. And so there's, again, in Beaumont, a lot of profanity about our study. People change, and again, so what this does is it lowers the score even further. And so this is one of the challenges, again, like I mentioned, of dealing with this type of data. So back to the big scale, how are people feeling as a function of time of day, according to what they share? This is just a single day repeated, and it shows the average happiness of words being used as a function of time of day, and it's really peaking in the morning, and it just goes down all day. We're just getting sadder as the day goes on. And profanity's going up all day. So these are like the 6 words you can't say. That's just going up. And so this is a website you can go and see what some of the findings look like for this instrument. We have made it interactive, so you can go and pick a potential, a time of year. What we see typically here is that Saturdays tend to be the happiest day of the week, and Tuesdays tend to be sad. There's big spikes when something bad happens in the world. Usually those are unexpected negative events, terrorist attacks, and natural disasters. Sometimes there's a boy band that leaves the group and does a solo album. That can be a sad day on Twitter. All kinds of things happen. So that's a place that you can go and check out what we're finding. Some of the things we've looked at recently, we've tried to understand what, how to characterize what happened after George Floyd's murder. And according to all the instruments we have, it was the biggest event on social media in the time that we looked. It was a period when lots of people, because of coronavirus, were not paying attention to the things they normally do. There wasn't, sports or culture or music to talk about as much. So a lot of attention there. And then, we had one of students in our group look at individuals who had been killed, black individuals killed by police over the last, period of time, 10 years or so, and found that during that period, a lot of the individuals who had died earlier were having their names spoken online repeatedly, and so it was a demonstration of that rhetorical strategy of saying the names of these people, and that persisted, and the connection between whether events in the real world and events online correspond to each other. This is a thing that we're exploring in a lot of these studies. Okay, so and some folks went on after that study and surveyed people and asked, how are you feeling? And that period was the angriest and saddest period in many of the lives of the people they looked at, which is consistent with what we found in our instruments. So we've had a number of partnerships with organizations like data journalists with the USA Today, for example, looking at what words people use following the conviction of Derek Chauvin. This is a real-time interaction mechanism that really simply hasn't existed before. The day of the Capitol insurrection, violence and protesters and things like this, these are words people are using. And actually, one of the projects we worked on during that period was presented by the House managers who were, as part of their impeachment trial for Trump. Some of that work that we did was cited during that trial. So some of the, a lot of the criticism of looking at Twitter alone is that it's some ecosystem by itself, but things happen in the real world because of what people are sharing online. One of the more recent collaborations was with The Economist, looking at how people in Russia are feeling about what's going on with the invasion of the Ukraine. And so this is 10 years worth of data. These are tweets written in Russian. You can see back in 2014 when they invaded Crimea, there really was no reaction on Russian Twitter. And over this same period of time, Gallup polling of people in Russia correlated very well with what we were seeing in the Twitter data, but they stopped being able to make those surveys after Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, and we saw a massive dip you can see over here on the right. So that's data that really that doesn't exist, how people feel about what's going on there, because Putin has made it illegal for journalists to talk about the war. So we have an ongoing collaboration both with Gallup and with The Economist to try and do more work like this, where it's harder in some places of the world to get information. The word ashamed in Russian, I'm sparing you plotting it all in Russian, but that was the word that was most different at that period of time. So Kirk mentioned some of our work on stories. I think it's fair to say that most of what we understand about the world is not given to us by science, but rather the stories that we tell each other and what our friends believe. And so understanding them, that's a really important part of all the things we do. And so we have this big new project that I'll tell you a little bit about. So it starts with some motivation by a famous author, Kurt Vonnegut, describing an idea he had about what stories do for us.
Well, there's no reason why the simple shapes of stories can't be fed into computers. They are beautiful shapes. This is the GI axis, good fortune, ill fortune. Is the shape of the curves of what matters and not their origins. So we'll start a little above average. Is why get a depressing person? Somebody gets into trouble, gets out of it again. People love that story. They never get sick of it.
Okay, so we of course wanted to understand. Well, is that he claims this to be a popular story that gets retold over and over again. Is this true? So we downloaded a bunch of books, several thousand of them. We had evidence from a prior study by Matt Jockers that there was a consistent correlation between how people feel while they're reading through something and what our instruments were revealing back. So the black curve here is how somebody feels reading through Romeo and Juliet. And then the blue curve is what our sentiment analysis detection software was telling us. And so we collected all of these online stories. One of our graduate students, Andy Reagan, he actually built a little instrument. You could plug in the spine of a book, and it would read the ebook off of it and render the time series of a window sliding through and tell you how happy the words were in that section. So there's a website to visualize all of that stuff too, thousands of books. And we found effectively at the end that Vonnegut was right. There are roughly 6 emotional arcs in fiction, and the one he was talking about is in the top, Man in a Hole. That turned out to be the one that sold the best in the data that we looked at. And not surprisingly, it actually is the one that has been most successful as a political slogan as well. You may know it as Make America Great Again. It encapsulates very quickly in 4 words this really important idea that we all want as the trajectory of our life, that things are going to be better in the future, better than they are now, and maybe they used to be pretty good in the past. And so in 4 words, to latch on to the mechanism we have in our head ready to absorb that story for ourselves. This is a slogan that's been used by many presidents, candidates prior, including Reagan and Clinton, but Trump did a very good job collapsing that for many of the people who supported him. So we now have this big project to try and understand how these stories that we tell through social media and through the books and our culture, how they're being spread. And so the project is called The Science of Online Corpora, Knowledge and Stories. And it's a big project that will happen over the next 5 years. That's really about taking some of the projects that I've shown you so far and making it easier for people in the social sciences and the humanities to use these instruments without having to go and get a computer science degree. And that connection is one that we've been missing and that we're really excited to try and make with a lot of our colleagues that are not traditionally doing STEM. So the SOCs, yes, this is our plan. These are some folks that are doing some of the social science applications. So Kirk mentioned Jeremiah, for example, who studies misinformation and disinformation and how it's shared. Tricia Schramm here, she's trying to understand what connection we have to the climate and has folks write letters to their future generations about what they're doing about the climate now, and then sees what effect that has on how the authoring of those stories changes their perspective on the climate. We have a lot of applications in health. Bob Gramling, for example, is a palliative care physician interested in trying to improve the conversations that doctors and patients have at the end of their lives and helping those patients feel heard and understood. And there's all kinds of information in those conversations that is very sensitive, but that we can learn from using the instruments that we've built. We have a whole other team of people working on education and workforce development projects, and it's really exciting moving forward. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little more about our focus on mental health. So you may not be surprised to hear that over the last 10 years, the phrase mental health is being used 100 times more often now online than it was. So that's a massive change over this period. It's good that there's less stigma in talking about it. There's certainly evidence that there are increasing rates in people feeling anxiety and depression and other mental health challenges. It's being talked about on Twitter. There's days where it's awareness days where it's it's sort of in the realm of BTS in the top 10 phrases for that day. So we've done a lot of work to try and understand what can be inferred about somebody's mental health from what they post online. This is work led by a colleague of mine, Andrew Reese, who recruited people who'd been diagnosed with PTSD or depression and looked at differences between their social media posts in the year leading up to that diagnosis and a control population who did not receive one. And we found all kinds of interesting things. For example, that people who end up being diagnosed with depression, they have less faces in the photos they post to Instagram before that diagnosis. The colors in those photos tend to be darker and bluer and grayer. And this is not surprising if you know somebody who's depressed, you've been depressed yourself. Psychiatrists will tell you that you literally see less color in the world, you spend less time in large groups of people, and that information is visible in things that people are posting. This is, of course, great news if you're interested in trying to figure out how to have your phone give better data to you about how you're doing. You can imagine a future where you've authorized your phone to send information to your doctor, and every morning they wake up with a rank-ordered list of the people they should see and call and reach out to, rather than having to make people make an appointment a month from now or find a new physician. There's a much better way for that healthcare to be prioritized. You can also imagine a version where your phone starts showing you ads for things to buy because it knows you're about to be manic, for example. So there's versions of the future where this type of data can really help us, or really be, we could be harmed by the extraction of value as in the surveillance economy would indicate. So we're really committed and trying to figure out how to make sure that things like this are helping us, and that the algorithms that we work on are contributing to individuals being able to make better decisions for themselves. So that's one example. People who wrote back, in reaction to that study, I'll say again, there's sort of like, if the black and white filter's the one that people use when they're depressed, I won't use that one anymore, and that way I'm dodging that diagnosis. There's a reaction that people have, and will start behaving differently because they have learned about what we're sharing. So we also, it's very clear that nature as a mechanism to deliver mental health benefits is the most scalable thing we have. We can't have a psychiatrist and therapist talking to everybody every day. And so, one of the projects that we've been working on for a while is figuring out what role nature can play in people's health. We, with the data that we have, of course, wanted to check and see what effect does nature have on people, and can we observe that through Twitter? So we went and got tweets from parks. Like every city in the US, we went and got tweets from the parks in those cities, compared the words people use there to urban areas nearby that are, where there's less trees, and same time of day and day of week, and controlling for those things. We see a massive bump, like New Year's Eve or Christmas level bump in people's mood when they're posting Twitter messages from nature. It is a bit ironic, of course, that we would use a screen to try and estimate that, but that's what we had at the time. So people are happier. And it's not so much that they're using the words that you might imagine about being outside, it's that they use negative words less when they're spending time in nature, which is really nice. And it's also something that we were attempting to understand by looking at screen time use while people are in nature. They're tweeting, for example. That's how we saw them in that study. So we have another study more recently looking at how people use, these are undergrads, use smartphones when they're in nature. And in fact, it turns out for the first half hour that they're outside in nature, they actually spend more time on screens than they might when they're back in their room, because they're like texting their friends and calling people, and it's like a social time for them. And they really need to be outside for much longer, like a few hours, before they start to use their screens less. So it's not a simple story, that for at least for this age group, for the undergrads, that they should just go outside for a half hour. So I have a couple kids with me here today that I'm thankful for. You can imagine being at the dinner table in my house, and it's like, will you please explain youth culture to me? Like, what are the latest trends? I'm studying these things, and I'm sorry to you both for having put you through that. But one of our things we would do is, during COVID, it's like we have to get outside. Okay, the screens are killing us. The Zoom school. Oh my gosh, I know everybody's got their own special version of hell from COVID, and we needed to get outside. So I had never really built anything. I'm not a handy person, but I Googled. Okay, I'd like to know, what's the best tree house that a person could build if they just are otherwise generally useless, and so I got a kit in the mail, and the kids helped me work on this. We drilled some holes in the tree. This is a 16-foot long. There's 4 boards there, 16 feet long, and the tree is kind of cool. It's like the tree will move inside and it'll slide back and forth. This is my son Afton, very proudly. There's free labor around the house, so it was helpful to have them. It was exhausting, yeah. So this is like April of 2020. I also want to thank so Afton, he actually put in all the screws on that platform, and this kit that they gave us is like, okay, if you can build a platform, you can probably make it from there. Got a hammer, circular saw, we'll be okay. My dad's drill. I have to say thank you to Kate too, my wife, because at this time. I knew that being outside was good for us, but I spent maybe a little too much time outside, possibly. It got way out of control. This is what it ended up looking like, okay? So it's 2 stories. It's got a fireplace. Yeah. I got to teach my class out here. It will stand. It'll stand up. We've done like the engineering calculation. Suresh, don't worry. It's not going to fall down. But this, is like nature has all kinds of benefits to us that we don't get from screens, and that we don't really understand well. We know that it's good for us to be outside. We know that we get something from that experience that we're really not getting, as we didn't evolve to sit and type on laptops, right? So yeah, we thought about how we might design a study for students here at UVM to encourage them to get outside. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. It's the lived experiences measured using rings study. I described that anxiety and depression are a big part of how undergrads are experiencing the world, and more than half of the first-year students here can arrive with that diagnosis. That's what we've seen, and we decided to try and encourage them to spend time outside and to exercise, and to talk about how they were feeling in a randomized controlled trial. Right. So what we did is we recruited people. We gave them this Aura ring, which measures your heart rate while you're sleeping. And then we randomized some of them to just wear the ring and tell us how they're feeling. We asked them some questions. And then others of them to go spend time outside, others of them to exercise indoors, and others to go attend a therapy group that was guided by UVM clinical psych PhD students here at UVM, and are interested in what effect these things have on us. You all probably know the amount of each of these things that you get And maybe if you're old enough, you've dabbled in your self-care, and you've dialed it in pretty well, and you know how much time you need to spend outside or talking to friends about how you're doing. But these are people who don't know any of that. They've just left home. Their life has changed a lot, and so we're trying to help them figure that out. So we have an app that they download where we can ask them questions about how they're doing, how they're feeling. We have another app that knows, based on the GPS position of their phone, how much nature they're getting. So this is for all the students involved in the study, the tree canopy and the features of the parks nearby, water, light pollution and air pollution, the weather, and they get a nature dose score every day from that app. And then we can see what effect some of the interventions we're having with them will have. Mood Lifters is the curriculum for the therapy group. These people were guided through things like meditation and journaling and some of the sort of mental hygiene tricks and hacks that we understand. And they met in small groups of maybe a half dozen over the course of the semester every week together. The Aura Ring, this thing is pretty remarkable. There's no screen on it. It's got a temperature sensor and a motion sensor. It measures your heart rate, the stage of sleep that you're in. We have Michaela in the back who's an expert on the details of how the Aura Ring works. And this thing's pretty remarkable. So I have, this is an example of about a month ago where I was not feeling well, and the curve on the bottom right is my temperature. So it knew I had a fever overnight, and even though I had slept really well, it said, take it easy today. That was the guidance that it gave me. And that sort of information, which we can toggle on and off actually to decide whether students see this stuff, is the sort of thing we'll look at to decide what effect these interventions are having. So this is an example visualization Michaela did of all of the fall data from those students. This is fall 2022. Each row in this picture is a different student, and then it's a full week and when they were awake or asleep on average. And so the students in the study, like first years at UVM, they're really not having trouble sleeping, okay? Like they go to bed, they may go to bed late and inconsistently in terms of what time it is, but they sleep generally about 8 hours. You can see on the left the time that they go to bed on average, which is like a little after 12 a.m. And then on the right, you can see when they wake up. And so you can see these solid bands at the 15 and 30 and top of the hour where their alarms are going off. And that's the time that they're waking up. But they're not up in the middle of the night worried about stuff the way some of us in the room might be, okay? They're not having that problem, okay. So this is what the stages of their sleep look like from the ring. So they're, these different stages of sleep have different, mechanisms in terms of how they restore us. Deep sleep, you actually really only need about like 10 to 12% of your night in most of it's light sleep. The REM sleep happens a little bit later. That's often when people are dreaming. So if you've woken up and you kind of feel like you're still dreaming, you were in REM sleep. And so these stages, we found this is some important information. So I'll kind of skip ahead to, I guess this is an example of what your heart rate looks like overnight. This is from my data. So you go to sleep, and over time you sort of you relax and come down to some level, and then the shape of that heart rate. These are the sort of four canonical curves. I was mentioning Vonnegut's, the emotional arcs of stories. We have something like that for every night that you're asleep as well. And they mean something different about how you're doing, which one of these arcs you experience. These are Aura's examples of the arcs that people go through. For UVM students, Michaela's work again, she sees effectively two clusters, which are on the left for this sort of overnight heart rate data. When she attempts to use three clusters, it becomes this sort of spaghetti mess, and so it's not really a good example. So our undergrads, they seem to only have largely these two types of sleeps overnight. I'll describe a little more what we're learning from that. This is an example of what nature dose looks like for UVM. We're a pretty green place, and one of the challenges of this sort of work is we're trying to understand, how does nature affect you? Well, lots of the students want, they came here to be outside anyway. And so I'll talk about how we're looking to improve that relationship. So here are some of the preliminary findings from Lemurs, which is an ongoing study. So more than half of the students at some point during the semester met the criteria for a generalized anxiety disorder in filling out surveys for us, at least once during the fall. That was 2022. If you control for factors already known to predict stress, how many times they breathe overnight and the difference between that and their average was the best predictor. So you breathe about 15 times a minute overnight. And if you wake up in the morning and this ring says, actually last night you breathed about 16 times a minute, it's a sign that your body's stressed out, and it's something you wouldn't know. It's not something you count, how often you breathe overnight, but the ring can tell us, and it's predictive of the stress you would report on a survey the next day. So that's really nice if you're trying to think about how to ask, to stop asking people how they're doing, if it can be inferred in this way. It's also how Aura might suggest to you something to do during the day, what category of activity might be good for you. The heart rate patterns that I showed a minute ago, a prior mental health diagnosis or past traumatic experiences are the things that are most predictive of which of those two arcs an individual would fall into. So this, again, the sort of screening technology that we might use the data we're producing passively to suggest to someone's physician that they be seen for some reason, and rank ordering that diagnosis based on, or that screening based on data, not just from what you say, but what your body's actually doing. And then the last thing that's really exciting is that the bake-off between therapy and exercise and time outside, it appears that nature has won. And this is a fantastic result for us because it's the sort of thing that scales the best. And it's also, if any of you have ever had the experience of like going outside for a brisk walk with a friend, talking about how you're doing, it's hitting all of those, all three of the mechanisms that we're testing here. So there's good reason for that to be something you can do. It's the most scalable and accessible. Yeah, so go outside and walk with a friend. Science says. Okay, just about done with all this stuff. This lemur study, we're trying to recruit a new cohort of students every year. We have done that again this year. So there's 600 both sophomores and freshmen right now who are taking part. We're going to, this spring, do this single session intervention where we ask people to describe for us what it is they want to improve about their well-being, and then pay them if they do that thing. And then we'll be able to tell if they actually did from what the ring looks like. We're not going to take their money away if they tell us that they did it. And when we learn, in fact, they didn't, they're going to get paid for this. And we're going to explore what effect different types of incentives have on that. You maybe test whether giving to charity works better, or after you miss a day of doing what you said you'd do, pay you a little bit more the next time you start doing it again, because those things have been shown to help people change their behaviors in the past. So that's our plan for the spring. We're very excited to be partnering with Gallup. The details are in the works here. You probably have heard of Gallup as the organization that surveys people in the U.S. There's about 100,000 panelists that they survey to try and understand how we feel about abortion and gun control and politicians over time, right? And all the instruments I showed you about social media, the goal was to put something up that was complementary to what those traditional social science methods do. But now we're going to be able to partner with them to compare how people feel when they're answering that question, how they're actually behaving online. And in this case, if we put rings on folks, and we can see how the physiology connects with how they're doing and what their reported feelings are. So really excited about that update. The representativeness of that sample is going to be much better than, for example, UVM freshmen in terms of how this extends to the real world. And again, I mentioned the at the beginning, this simple experiment. Each one of those beads, it's very hard to predict where any one of them is going to go, but we can get, the climate effectively at the end. And we can also imagine taking that experiment and tilting the dial. And that's really what we're trying to do, is just make it easier for people, reduce friction, to make good decisions about what they're doing. And that's just tilting gravity in that steel bead experiment, so that the distribution at the population level moves over. People are getting better sleep, they're feeling better. And your chances of, there's a lot of randomness there. Like the physics of that experiment, it shows that, there's the component that's gravity's pulling down, but then there's also, all these beads jostling into each other and bumping. You can't control everything that's going to go on in your life. But you can bias, by making better decisions, using the data on how your body's doing, you can bias that distribution to be better at the population level and for any individual. And really, I think what we're ultimately going to be able to do is, just like we can forecast a hurricane a week in advance, using this type of data, I think we're going to be able to say, okay, like today's the day you should bring your umbrella. It's going to rain. It's just something we do normally now. I really think we're going to be able to do that for our health. Okay, just like I showed you, my temperature was up. I'm going to recommend this set of activities today, and maybe don't with respect to how much time you spend talking about how you're feeling or exercising or time outside, like how many parts of that do we need? And we don't really have any good guidance on that. You just know that, these things are supposed to help. But so bring an umbrella. That's the version of this that for your health that I think that we can come up with. All right, so we're trying to do data science for social good. We're finishing up here. There's websites, Story Wrangler and Hedonimeter, where you can learn about what the population level collective attention looks like, which is really just something that was impossible 20 years ago, and now we're trying to connect to Gallup polling data. We have the lived experiences measured using Ring study, where we're trying to take our data and give people the power to do good things for themselves based on it. And SOCS, our new project to connect some of these instruments to people who do work in the humanities and the social sciences. So I have a few thanks that I wanted to make. I have people who've been involved here with the lemurs study. I didn't realize when we got going on this that it's like it really is like a clinical trial because we're randomly assigning students to these different interventions. It's a massive effort. Lots of people who've been helping out with this from all over campus. People with expertise in psychiatry and biomedical engineering and natural resources. So thanks to all those folks. There have been about 75 students, undergrad, grad, PhD, master's students, and postdocs who've done work on the projects I've shown you. We've got funding from the National Science Foundation, MITRE, AMD, MassMutual, Johnson & Johnson, Gund, a few others. So a few special thanks. My partner, Peter, who's just like the smartest guy I know and super funny. And like knows so many, he's sort of like always right, but 10 years too soon, which is like its own special hell that you're right before everyone else and nobody believes you. And he's a remarkable guy. The VACC team, I'm just so thankful. So we just today put in a new proposal, like Kirk talked about, for effectively what would be like 10,000 iPhones hooked to each other. That'll do 100 petaflops, 10 to the 17 calculations a second. And it's the sort of thing that will enable all kinds of new machine learning research on campus. It's really great. And so Andrea Elledge is the figurehead behind pushing that all through. Some folks who know how to get funding really appreciate your role in this. So Jay is here in the audience. Thank you. And Ingrid Barcelo, who has helped with some of the proposal writing. But Janki, the chair in math, Linda, Dean in SEMS, and Kirk, really helpful to have people like umbrella-ing for us so we can focus on science. And that's really exciting to have that sort of support. Colleagues in complex systems, really appreciate you. Kettlebell team in the front, thank you. And Dom Grasso hired me. I had one paper. I can't believe he agreed to hire me to work here, but it's worked out okay, so that was good. I also want to thank my dad, who's on the left here. He was a material scientist at Rutgers, and I just love learning because of talking to him. And my mom, who came today, I appreciate it. Mom, this is a picture of her choreography. She's a modern dance instructor, and so teaching and learning, it's the best profession. And Rose and Poppy. Thank you all for your attention. I'm happy to take questions.